At 10:30, on a rain-soaked morning in October 1943, the shoreline of Mono Island trembled under the weight of something the Japanese defenders could not yet name. The jungle was still wrapped in mist, the surf heavy and gray, when a new sound rolled across the Treasury Islands. It was not rifle fire. It was not the thud of mortar shells. It was the deep, steady growl of diesel power. Moments earlier, American and New Zealand infantry had fought for every inch of the beach. Now, through the haze, the silhouette of a Caterpillar D8 bulldozer emerged, its steel blade glistening with salt and rain. Behind the controls sat a Seabee, one of the men whose job was not only to fight, but to build. Yet even here, in the opening hours of this Pacific War landing, the machine's presence carried a meaning far larger than the battlefield in front of it. To the men listening from the tree line, that engine signaled a truth they were never meant to hear. The island hopping campaign would not be won by firepower alone. It would be won by the speed of construction, by the ability to turn a raw jungle into an airfield before the next tide shifted. So the question is this: how could one bulldozer help reshape the outcome of an entire war? The first hours on Mono Island revealed a truth that every soldier in the Pacific War eventually learned. Nothing about these battles was simple. The landing at the Treasury Islands was meant to be a small step in the wider island hopping campaign, but the resistance that morning showed how costly even a single beach could become. Japanese defenders, though expecting Allied forces somewhere along the Solomon chain, were caught off balance by the timing and location. Their pillboxes, carved from coconut logs and layered with sand, created narrow fields of fire that swept across the shoreline. Every step forward carried a price. Among the Americans pushing through the surf were the men of the 87th Naval Construction Battalion. The Seabees trained not only to survive combat, but to transform landscapes. Their presence in this first wave was no accident. Intelligence officers knew that capturing an island was only half of the objective. The other half, equally vital, was the ability to make that island operational within hours. Roads, supply dumps, airstrips, and fuel storage had to appear almost as quickly as the beach was secured. That was why the Caterpillar D8 bulldozer came ashore so early. Designed in Peoria and San Leandro and shipped thousands of miles across the Pacific, the machine was far more than a piece of equipment. For the Seabees, it was a weapon of momentum, a tool that converted victory into infrastructure. When the engine started, diesel fumes mixed with salt air and a deep mechanical rhythm echoed across the jungle. To defenders listening from concealed bunkers, the sound alone carried a warning. The Americans were not merely invading. They were preparing to stay. Then came the moment that turned a machine into legend. Machinist mate Aurelio Tason, a 38-year-old construction worker from Massachusetts, was operating his D8 when Lieutenant Charles Turnbull shouted that a Japanese pillbox to their front was pinning down the infantry. The position was built to withstand small arms fire and to dominate the beach approach. Traditional assault tactics would cost time and lives. Tason understood both terrain and machine. He lifted the bulldozer blade, turning the steel into a shield and pushed forward directly into the line of fire. Bullets snapped against the blade. Sand kicked up in sheets. Turnbull fired his carbine to cover the approach. Tason maneuvered behind the pillbox, dropped the blade, and drove straight through the structure. In minutes, the bunker collapsed under the weight of earth and timber, sealing its defenders inside. The advance resumed. That single action captured the essence of the Seabees, men who could fight when necessary, but whose real strength lay in what came after. Crushing the pillbox cleared the path for infantry, but more importantly, it allowed the bulldozers to do the work that mattered most in the Pacific War. The faster the island could be carved into roads and runways, the faster the campaign advanced. The story of Mono Island did not end with that destroyed pillbox.
It began there.
What happened after the pillbox was crushed revealed why the Seabees became one of the most influential forces in the Pacific War. Once the beachhead stabilized, the Caterpillar D8 bulldozers moved inland without pause. The first task was always the same: carve space out of the jungle. Trees fell, coral banks shifted, and the dense undergrowth that had defined the island for centuries disappeared under the steel blades. Within hours, supply dumps took shape. Ammunition, food, medical stores, and spare parts needed secure ground long before the next storm or counterattack arrived. Momentum mattered. On Mono and Sterling Islands, the Seabees cut more than 20 miles of roads in only a few days. These were not civilian roads built for convenience. They were arteries that allowed an entire invasion force to live, move, and fight. The faster these routes appeared, the faster the island hopping campaign could continue. And always at the heart of this effort was the Caterpillar D8 bulldozer, a machine that could move more earth in 1 hour than hundreds of men could accomplish in a day. But the real showcase of American construction power unfolded as the Pacific War stretched across the Solomon Islands and beyond. The pattern became unmistakable. At Guadalcanal, the Japanese had spent months trying to finish Henderson Field using hand tools, carts, and labor battalions. When Marines captured the airstrip, it was barely functional. Seabees repaired it under fire and had it operational for American fighters within days. That speed not only kept the Marines alive, it shifted the balance of air power across the region. On Espiritu Santo, the Seabees carved a 6,000-foot runway from untouched jungle in just 20 days. In New Georgia, they began building a fighter strip only hours after the first landings. 9 days later, American aircraft were using it in active operations. Every new runway shortened the distance to the next objective. Every new port made it possible to resupply faster and strike further. Then came Tarawa. After 3 days of some of the most brutal fighting of the Pacific War, the island's Japanese airfield lay shattered. And yet, 15 hours after the last shots were fired, the Seabees had the runway functioning again. The speed sounded impossible. But the island hopping campaign depended on exactly that: capture, build, move, repeat. Saipan and Tinian brought the strategy to its peak. 4 days after securing Eslido Airfield, heavy American aircraft were already taking off from its repaired surface. On Tinian, the Seabees constructed 6 massive runways, each over 8,000 feet long, designed for B-29 bombers. From those runways, the final strikes of the war would soon launch. Across every island, the pattern held. Wherever the Seabees went, the Caterpillar D8 bulldozer went with them. And wherever the D8 went, the war moved faster. As the Pacific War pushed closer to Japan's inner defensive ring, the limits of Japanese engineering became impossible to ignore. The disparity was captured in a single number: 300. According to wartime engineering studies, one Caterpillar D8 bulldozer operating under good conditions could move as much earth in 1 hour as 300 laborers working an entire day. On paper, this seemed like a statistic. In reality, it was the measure of a collapsing empire. Japan's construction units, the Setsueitai, relied almost entirely on human muscle. Thousands of Korean and Taiwanese laborers, supervised by Japanese officers, dug trenches with shovels, shaped fortifications with axes, and hauled timber by hand. Their effort was unrelenting, but the output could never match diesel engines and steel blades. While the Seabees sculpted airfields and roads in days, Japanese crews needed weeks or months for similar projects. The result was predictable. Many Japanese defensive systems were incomplete when American forces arrived, leaving garrisons exposed before the first shot was fired. As the island hopping campaign advanced, Japanese commanders shifted their strategy. Beach defenses were shattered too easily by American bombardment, so troops withdrew inland, building layered defensive lines. When those positions failed, they turned to underground warfare. The caves of Pillbox, the tunnels of Leyte, and finally the honeycombed fortress of Iwo Jima represented a desperate attempt to slow the inevitable. These defenses were brutal and costly. They turned every ridge into a killing ground, every bunker into a last stand. But even underground, the defenders faced a force they could not outlast. On Iwo Jima, General Tadamichi Kiribayashi's meticulously prepared positions took months to create. The Seabees, landing under fire, brought their Caterpillar D8 bulldozers ashore almost immediately. They cleared debris, opened roads to Marine units, sealed cave entrances with coral and earth, and prepared the ground for airfield construction even while fighting raged nearby. The contrast was stark. Japanese defenders had spent months turning the island into a fortress. American builders needed days to begin turning it into an operational base. But this speed came at a cost. The Seabees did not operate in safety. They endured artillery strikes, sniper fire, nighttime raids, and the hazards of heavy machinery on unstable ground. Casualty records show hundreds of Seabees killed and thousands wounded across the Pacific War, not only from combat, but from accidents, collapses, explosions, and tropical disease. They built airfields in darkness, repaired roads under fire, and fought as infantry when their lines were breached. Their mission demanded both courage and relentless labor, often without rest. By the end of the war, the magnitude of their achievement was visible across the map of the Pacific. More than 400 bases, over 100 airfields, thousands of miles of road, medical facilities, ports, fuel depots, and entire logistical hubs carved from jungle and coral. Each one pushed the Pacific War closer to Japan's doorstep. Each one made the next step of the island hopping campaign possible. And each one stood as proof that the outcome of this war was determined long before the final battles were fought, not by who could dig the deepest trenches, but by who could rebuild the fastest. Across the broader strategic landscape of the Pacific War, American commanders understood that victory depended on far more than battlefield courage. It depended on industry, the factories that built ships and aircraft, the rail lines that carried supplies, and the assembly plants that produced the Caterpillar D8 bulldozers powering the Seabees across thousands of miles. In wartime reports, Fleet Admiral William Halsey ranked bulldozers fourth among the tools that won the Pacific, ahead of cruisers, destroyers, and even battleships. Coming from a man who commanded carrier task forces, the statement revealed a quiet truth often overlooked in traditional military histories. The United States produced bulldozers in the thousands, drawing on companies like Caterpillar, International Harvester, and Alice Chalmers. Wartime contracts ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Machines rolled off assembly lines in Peoria and California, crossed the ocean with spare parts, and arrived at remote outposts ready for the Seabees to operate. This industrial rhythm meant that even when machines were destroyed on islands like Bougainville or Pillbox, replacements arrived quickly. Japan had no comparable capacity. Its factories were already strained producing aircraft and naval vessels. Even if they had managed to build heavy construction equipment, American submarines ensured it could not reach garrisons scattered across the Pacific. But the true difference lay not only in quantity, but in skill. The Seabees were not teenagers rushed into service. They were seasoned tradesmen, carpenters, welders, heavy equipment operators, many in their late 30s or 40s, some even older. Their training blended Marine Corps combat instruction with technical schooling at places like Camp Endicott and Port Hueneme. When they arrived on an island, they knew how to judge soil, read terrain, drain swamps, reinforce foundations, and repair their own equipment under fire. Their expertise made the Caterpillar D8 bulldozer more than a machine. It made it a strategic instrument. Japanese officers recognized this long before the war ended. Post-war interrogations revealed a recurring theme. America's ability to build faster than Japan could destroy was decisive. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome openly acknowledged that Japan never found an answer to American construction speed. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had predicted the same outcome years earlier. Having studied in the United States, he understood the industrial imbalance and warned that a prolonged conflict would be unwinnable. The island hopping campaign did not just move American forces westward. It showcased, island by island, the industrial muscle that defined modern warfare. In every shattered bunker, in every newly paved runway, the strategic reality became clearer. Wars are won not only by fire, but by foundations. In the years after the Pacific War ended, many of the Caterpillar D8 bulldozers that had carved runways under fire found a second life far from the battlefields. Some were shipped back to the United States and sold to civilian contractors. Others remained on the islands they had helped secure, reshaping landscapes for farms, roads, and post-war reconstruction. A few even returned to Japan as part of the occupation effort, machines that had once advanced the island hopping campaign, now rebuilding the nation that once stood against them. Their olive drab paint faded, but the steel carried the memory of the Pacific etched into every dent and weld. For the Seabees who operated these machines, the transition to peacetime felt natural. Many returned to construction jobs, bringing with them the skills refined under the most punishing conditions imaginable. Their experience became part of the foundation for the highways, ports, and industrial centers that transformed post-war America. The same practical ingenuity that shaped airfields on Saipan shaped the infrastructure of the modern United States. Today, a handful of wartime bulldozers sit in museums at places like Port Winneme, their engines silent but their presence unmistakable. Standing beside them, visitors can almost hear the mechanical pulse that once echoed across island jungles. These machines remind us that the Pacific War was not won by a single battle or a single strategy, but by the relentless ability to build again and again, island after island. The island hopping campaign succeeded because the Seabees and their Caterpillar D8 bulldozers transformed raw terrain into forward bases faster than Japan could react. That is the enduring lesson. Modern warfare may look different, with satellite networks and precision weapons, but the underlying truth remains unchanged. Victory belongs to those who can create the infrastructure to sustain it. Logistics, industry, and construction, quiet forces that rarely appear on recruitment posters, shape the outcome long before the first shot is fired. So, as we look back on this story, perhaps the real question is not how one bulldozer helped win a war, but what it tells us about the power of preparation itself. What do you think the greatest lesson of the Pacific War's builders really is? If you value these deeper histories, stories of the machines, the labor, and the unseen foundations of victory, consider subscribing. There is much more to explore, and every chapter brings us closer to understanding how wars are truly won.